This is Cato Weekly Video. Incentives would seem to operate clearly, in plain view. Tyler Cowen argues in his book, Discover Your Inner Economist, that understanding how incentives work is not as simple as mere dollars and cents. He spoke at a Cato Book Forum November 15, 2007. This is a segment of a longer event available at our website, cato.org.
Discover Your Inner Economist is a popular economics book, but its roots really come from philosophy and some philosophical problems I've wrestled with for a long time. Let me talk for a moment about those. If one reads either Henry Sidgwick or Derek Parfit, both of whom have broadly been read as utilitarian philosophers, there's an ongoing conflict between what is called common sense morality, which are the moral ideas that, say, one's grandmother might present, and utilitarian reasoning, which would be the kind of razor-sharp logical calculation that one would make as to what is in the greatest good of oneself or mankind. And this has been a long-running conflict as to whether what utilitarianism tells you is consistent with common sense morality or whether utilitarianism conflicts with common sense morality. A very simple example of how a possible conflict pops up comes in the writings of Peter Singer, the very famous Australian philosopher. Singer is well known for insisting that we are morally obliged to send very high percentages of our income to very poor people in other countries, simply because those people are starving. The claim is we could give up ice cream and we could save human lives. It seems from a utilitarian point of view, we might be obliged to do this. But in what you would call common sense morality does not generally tell people that they have to take 70 or 80% of their income and send it to sub-Saharan Africa. So I'm actually writing a number of books at the same time, and one of them is on this general question of, when it comes to helping the poor, do common sense morality and utilitarianism, properly understood, broadly coincide, or is there in fact this clash where we have to choose between the two? And it's a general theme of my thinking on quite a number of matters, including policy toward the poor and including economic growth, that the gap between utilitarian or economic reasoning and common sense morality is actually a lot smaller than it appears to be at first. So I view the fundamental enterprise simply being, how should we think about the world in normative terms? We have these two frameworks, common sense morality, which we grow up with, economics and utilitarianism, which we learn. And if we could bring the two together in some way by revising each just a bit, this to me would suggest that the new synthesis of those two ideas would have a fair amount of force. So the overall philosophical project of the book is really in this tradition of responding to Sidgwick and responding to Parfit, and also trying to save economics a bit, because I'm very aware of the status of economics as a set of recommendations which to most people are really quite bracing or sometimes offensive. If you try to speak about the notion of buying and selling kidneys in an open market, large numbers of people consider this either unacceptable or offensive or simply not to be considered. So I'm aware of the rather dubious status of my own discipline in the minds of most people, and I'd also like to ask, when it comes to a broader set of questions, is there some way in which we can again bring common sense morality and economic reasoning quite a bit closer? Both David Friedman and Steve Landsberg, as well as some of my colleagues like Robin Hanson, they tend to take the point of view, so much the worse for common sense morality. What we need to do is to shock people into accepting the eternal and absolute truths of economics, that you really can buy and sell everything, that if there's a problem at home, all you need to do is set up an auction market for the TV remote control. And if that doesn't work, well, you haven't structured the auction seriously enough. We need a second price auction, not just a Dutch or English auction, and so on and so on. This instinctively rubs me the wrong way, and again, I have more sympathy for what is usually called common sense morality. I think of common sense morality as something which has evolved over a long period of time. It's far from perfect, but it contains a lot of wisdom, even in cases where common sense morality appears to yield the wrong answer. Now, I think of a lot of the book Discover Your Inner Economist is based around what is essentially a single story. And this single story illustrates some of the book's key themes. And the single story is the story of how my wife and I tried to get our daughter, Jana, who at the time was 13, to do the dishes. At first, we would just say, Jana, do the dishes. I estimate it worked about 40% of the time. In retrospect, this was a paradise lost. But to us, 40% didn't seem that good. After all, we're her parents. We're like older and bigger and whatever else. Like we had more of it. We felt we should be able to do better than 40%. So one day, believe it or not, this was my wife's idea. Maybe she got it from reading my blog, but it was her idea. My wife said we should pay Jana to do the dishes. Now, I wasn't sure this would work, but I thought, well, look, actually, I was the stepfather, not the biological father. I was pretty new on the scene. And if my wife said we should, do this with her daughter, and, I am an economist, incentives matter at some margin, who was I to say no? So I said, okay, it's fine with me. We'll pay Jana to do the dishes. So the first 2 or 3 nights, this experiment, it worked very well. Jana did the dishes immediately, and she got paid. But by night 3 or 4, there was a sudden shift, and all of a sudden we realized that Jana was never, ever doing the dishes. And from that point on, the dishes were never done again, even though we were paying her. My wife wasn't sure what was going on, but she had another idea. She's Russian, by the way. And her idea was, well, paying her didn't work, so therefore we should penalize her with money for not doing the dishes. So instead of paying her when she does them, now if she didn't do the dishes, we take away from her allowance. And we set up a little check sheet on the refrigerator. The black marks accumulated pretty rapidly. And next thing you know, Jana was at 0 or perhaps negative net wealth. Not counting her human capital. The question is, what was really going on there? I think there are at least 2 factors that operated. And both have to do with perceptions. So the traditional economist would think, you want something, you pay to get it done. You want the roof fixed, you pay a guy to come in and fix the roof. Basically, that works. You want a banana, you buy a banana. But it doesn't work all the time. One of the key lessons of economics, in my view, is you cannot buy and sell everything. It simply doesn't work. But I think when we view this episode in terms of perceptions, my wife viewed it as, we're motivating Jana with incentives. Jana viewed it as, my parents are trying to control me. So in her more sophisticated view, this was what we economists call a multi-period game. And if Jana would signal to her wealthier, bigger, stronger, whatever, more powerful parents that they could buy her loyalty to do the dishes, the question would then arise, what else could they buy from Jana? Could they buy her future choice of boyfriend, her grades, her major, what kind of friends she would have, what school she would go to, and so on and so on. So, maybe we only saw the battle, Jana saw the war. She was, I would suppose, a better economist than either of us was. And she realized pretty quickly, hey, I'm setting a bad precedent. The thing I absolutely have to do is to refuse to do the dishes for money, because next thing you know, my freedom will be eroded. So the lesson there is that how an incentive works, you can't understand it just by looking at the nominal price. You have to understand it by asking, how do people perceive what's actually going on, and what loyalties are we committing to?
Tyler Cowen is author of the book Discover Your Inner Economist. This is Cato Weekly Video. More videos, podcasts, and full events are available at our website, cato.org.